Every 4 years, New York adds to itself a city the size of Boston or St. Louis. It is the largest Jewish city in the world, the largest Irish city, one of the largest German cities. More than 700,000 Russians call it home, and it houses more Italians than Rome. New York is the great whirlpool of the races. Edwin Hill.
No city was more appropriate to become the immigrant metropolis than New York. From the time of initial Dutch settlement in the 1620s, all through the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries. By any comparison in the world, New York was a multicultural, multi-ethnic, heterogeneous metropolis. It had already established a kind of a tradition of openness to newcomers, of never having a single dominant culture. But still, when you think about the incredible migration between, let's say, roughly 1880 and 1925, when millions of people come to the city, not just come to the United States, come through New York City every year, and they transform the city.
Even by the standards the city itself had set, the mammoth influx of peoples was without precedent in world history. By 1905, 4 out of 5 New Yorkers were now either the children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. No fewer than 70% of the city's public school children had been born outside the country. Forever after, many Americans would view New York as a kind of foreign country.
By 1900, the Lower East Side was, at least to an American, was not an American place, because it was strange babble of tongues of Eastern European Jews, or Little Italies had sprung up. Completely ethnic neighborhoods that were not separate unto themselves. But if you'd been walking on the streets, it would have been hard to tell what country you were in at the time.
Most of Elizabeth Street was Sicilian. Came from Sicily. And what that means is that a couple of the immigrants came over on a boat, 1901, 1902, 1910, and they were lucky enough to get a job, and luckier to get 2 rooms, they used to call them rooms, not apartments, in the tenements. What was happening at 232 Elizabeth Street was that people from one town in Sicily were coming in and staying in that one building, so that 232 became Cimina, which is a beautiful town outside of Palermo that my mother's mother comes from. Now, 241 across the street, the same thing was happening, but mainly from people from Polizzi Generosa, which is also outside of Palermo, but higher in the mountains. That's my father's father comes from. So they were across the street, and when my mother said that she met my father, there was a problem because there were different nationalities. She used the phrase different nationalities, and in reality it's just from different villages, really.
In coming to New York, the immigrants had not only crossed an ocean, they had, in most cases, exchanged an ancient way of life for the most modern and frenetic environment on Earth. The old village might have been wretched, the writer Irving Howe later said, but it was a thoroughly known place where one's ancestors lay buried. It did not loom up to terrifying heights. It required no special knowledge of machines in shops or on trolleys, and it seldom had much to do with the rigors of the clock.
I think that there is a tremendous sense as well of people making a leap from, in many cases, life that was like the Middle Ages into the most modern cosmopolis in the world. I mean, think about these people coming from places like Russia or Poland, in which life was really not all that different than it had been a couple hundred years ago. Then you're coming to New York, where you're in the most modern city of the world. You're making an enormous leap into modernity.
The Jews who come at the time come from a million different places, though mostly from Eastern Europe. And you have people from every class in society coming. You have people who were rich in the old country and who've lost it all. And then you have people who are in the middle and who come with a little bit of property, and then the most people come with nothing. All they come with is their capacity for labor power and the ideas in their heads and their capacity to think. And Hegel says that's the most important kind of capital for modern man, the capacity to think. And if you've got that, you can make up for everything else that you don't have.
The question is, how does it come that New York attracted all of this energy, was able to channel all this energy? And one is the geography thing. Two is the energy of the people who were here, who brought with them pent-up, generations of pent-up unfulfillment from where they came from. The Irish had been put down in Ireland for a long time, so they came here and they, by God, they were going to make it in America. They were going to show what the Irish really could do. And then the Germans who came were not the Germans who were happy at home. They were the Germans who were ticked off at home. But if you put all the Chinese or all the Eastern European Jews or all the Irish in the city, and they are in concentrated areas and they're 5-7 stories high and miserable housing, they have to be out on the streets and they have to be struggling to do something better so they can get out of that awful housing. Well, that's your engine.
Often when they came, they were shocked to discover that this wasn't what they thought it would be. And there are plenty of accounts of immigrants talking about life on the Lower East Side as being so far away from what they imagined the land of dollars to be, or the streets paved with gold. There's a great deal of sorrow and sense of loss for many immigrants.
By 1900, the most crowded neighborhoods in the world were in New York City, especially on the Lower East Side, but also in East Harlem. Conditions were abysmal. We don't need to exaggerate when we say that it's possible that housing conditions in New York City, certainly crowding, exceeded anything that the world has ever known before or since.
Crowded into stifling, often lightless tenements, immigrants escaped whenever they could to the street. Block after block, from long before dawn until long after dark, the streets were one vast, raucous, open-air bazaar, teeming with peddlers and vendors of every kind, hawking their wares from the sidewalks or from pushcarts, rented for 10 cents a day. By 1900, the streets of the Lower East Side were jammed with more than 25,000 pushcarts, which sold everything from vegetables to pots and pans, shoelaces, bolts of cloth, tools, and crockery. In the poorest wards, peddlers sold goods in minute quantities: a single candle, the wing of a chicken, 1 egg, or just the yolk of 1 egg.
Forget your past, your customs, your ideals. Select a goal and pursue it with all your might. You will experience a bad time, but sooner or later, you will achieve your goal. A bit of advice for you. Do not take a moment's rest. Run, do, work, and keep your own good in mind. A final virtue is needed in America, called cheek. Do not say, I cannot, I do not know. G.M. Price.
You take whatever is available to survive. People can get sanctimonious about immigrant groups and what they do, but they do what they have to do to survive. That's also a law of the city. It is a law from the beginning and it will be at the end. And that's not always going to work on Wall Street because that's not accessible to people. Cities are also about people coming from one environment and really making a tremendous adjustment into another and doing what they have to do to survive. That is not often a pretty picture in cities, or not always a pretty picture.
Nobody dragged them here. Nobody brought them here in chains. They came exhilarated by what was here, by the possibility of it. In my case, my parents are both Catholics from Belfast. So the sense that their children and they themselves could function in a place where nobody's going to ask their religion was amazing. The case of the Jews is, of course, the great example. You know, to go in one generation from the shtetl to have your kids graduate from universities in one generation, amazing. And that energy, that challenge, the questioning that goes on with someone who's new, saying, why is that here? Why does it work that way? Why do you do it that way? What if we do it this way? That kind of energy, I think, was the essence of it.
For most, the process of assimilation took place with remarkable speed. In less than a single generation, in just 10 years on average, most families on the Lower East Side had moved up or on.
The Jews start a little bit higher in the sense that they come with skills, needle trades often, and a little bit more money in their pocket, and rise higher. But the Italians also rise rapidly. So that what you have in this cauldron down in Lower Manhattan, you have these groups making an astonishing change in the space of a single generation or two, so that New York is what it was advertised. It was a city of opportunity, and the nation was. Rags to riches, no. But to get a solid job, to get a foothold in the land, to change from that peasant status that you'd known, New York turns out to be the best place in the United States to do that between about 1880 and certainly 1925.
The absolute demand of the city that you get to know each other, because you had to. You couldn't really stay in a ghetto and function. You had to leave the ghetto to go to work. You had to go to Manhattan. You had to go to Midtown. You had to go uptown. You had to go down, wherever it was. People moved, and the subway then became one of these great binding elements in the city that moved people around and put them up against each other. And sometimes they came up against each other in conflict, but the conflict didn't ever last very long. The Irish fought the Italians until they started marrying them. And then they both fought the Jews until they started marrying them.
It's a constant negotiation. How much will I let go of who I have been, and how much will I take on of a new persona? And that is true within a family, and is true for an individual. Parents wanting the children to maintain traditions that have helped define their own lives from their own culture, their own religious group, their own racial group, their own language group. And the children wanting to be American. And that often to the children means sloughing off these other, what they would consider vestiges of the old ways. For the parents, this is who we are. This conflict is set up.
We have to be Americans. We shall be. We shall learn English. We shall love America and help to build America. We shall accomplish in the new world 100 times more than we could in the old. But you will not be able to erase the old home from your heart. The heart will be drawn elsewhere. And in your solitude, images will rise up and stare in your faces with eternal sorrow. Abraham Cahan.
What is a New Yorker? Is he Jew or Irish? Is he English or German? Is he Russian or Polish? He may be something of all these, and yet he is wholly none of them. Something has been added which he had not before. He is quicker in his movement, less trammeled in his judgment. Though he may lose wisdom in sharpening his wit, the change is unmistakable. New York, indeed, resembles a magic cauldron. Those cast into it are born again. Charles Whibble.